Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We haven't got long, we've got a lot of ground to cover. This is basically the future of the out-of-home industry, according to some. I've been mentioning Programmatic over the past couple of days to people, and they've been getting very excited about it. But also, we've heard from people this morning that the word programmatic still kind of holds a relative fear amongst some people, particularly amongst sort of the big sort of brand marketers. So it's time for us to try and unpick what programmatic actually means for out-of-home, and how programmatic will help change omni-channel media buying and out-of-home as it pertains to it. So let's kick off with kind of a sort of like setting the scene question. What does out-of-home mean to you guys? Kind of how are you currently planning and buying out-of-home? Let's start with kind of the agency conversation. So Matt, let's kick off with you. Kind of what is out-of-home to you?
Sure. I think it's clearly it's about connecting, I think, online and the physical world together, but I wouldn't say that we take we believe in an audience first and channel neutral approach because our clients, customers live in a channelless world. So when we plan in an audience first world, we're actually not even planning out of home. We're planning all channels consistently based on where those audiences are. So I do think we take a more holistic approach to that, and out-of-home plays clearly a significant role in that, given the amount of touch points you could reach audiences throughout the day through media, through paid media.
Interesting. Stephanie, what's your perspective?
Sure. To me, out-of-home is a world of opportunity to extend the reach of what we're already doing from a digital perspective, just to increase that scale, to tie it all together from an audience perspective.
Casey?
Yeah, I mean, out of home, obviously, it's interacting with the consumer kind of throughout their journey outside of their computers and their mobile phones and things like that. Currently, I think kind of you mentioned omni-channel. I think currently, kind of two flavors of omni-channel cross-device or cross-channel rather executions. One of them's kind of more, developing data in one channel, using it in another. So kind of remarketing and on mobile and things like that based on out-of-home exposure. And then obviously, this is a big focus today, I think, is kind of the inventory bit. There's a lot of out-of-home inventory that where we can extend kind of our video budgets and whatnot, because we now literally have video-enabled out-of-home devices that can take some of that budget. So.
Okay, thank you. And Media Matt on the trade desk, you are not out-of-home specialists when it comes to technology. You are a technology layer, you're a big part of the service layer. What does out-of-home mean to you when it comes to omnichannel?
First. Oh, well, thank you. I think for us specifically, we're going to take a very specific approach on digital out-of-home. So I think I'll just highlight on what Casey mentioned, which is the extension of screens beyond the desktop, laptop, mobile experience and exposing to people outside of their home, so that goes beyond the typical CTV device. And then for us, from a programmatic standpoint, how do we make that in an automated fashion where our digital agencies that we work with can really access that omni-channel experience, really report in an omni-channel fashion, figure out how to optimize and better spend their dollars.
And Jim?
So I think out-of-home, I mean, first of all, it's the one kind of asset that we have out there that most people understand what it is. You know, some people in the programmatic world, I mean, if I tell my children what I do, if it's easy to say, see that thing digitally up there, it makes sense. Meaning, it's very much, out of home in general, it's prevalent in everyday life. It is one of the environments, I think Nick touched on this earlier, but brand safety really isn't an issue as much there as it is in some other places, so it means that to me. And then third is, how do we really leverage the incredible reach that we have from a branding budgets, but also be much more focused, whether it be audience that we talked about earlier, or location, or time of day. So I look at it as, everybody knows what it is, it's a huge opportunity, and it's now, with things moving more and more to digital, how do we have the ability to really isolate, to leverage it very, very much.
Great, thank you very much. And I would love to get an understanding of how your internal setup is within your companies, within the big holdcos, and kind of what you have, who is running out of home. If you have out of home separately, kind of as the analog version, and then you have out of home kind of that's being traded programmatically alongside other programmatically traded channels, and kind of what the people in this room, who they are dealing with within your different companies. So Matt, let's start with you, kind of within IPG, rather than Kadrian. How is out of home set up, and how are you all working together?
Sure. Consistent with our audience first approach, we have campaign managers and strategists, programmatic strategists that are looking at strategy across all channels. So they will, work on display, OTT, advanced television, digital out-of-home, audio, terrestrial radio even now, and out-of-home kind of sits there. There's specialists within the group that focus on specific channels, and we do have out-of-home specialists, but consistent with that channel neutral and audience-first approach, we have folks both on the strategy and the campaign management side that are doing it all.
And how well do you work together?
Well,
a loaded question, but is it a lovely, cohesive relationship?
I think it's when you're taking an audience-first approach, you're following that audience, so there's no reason for conflict because you're listening to data and looking at data and looking at audience delivery. So there's no conflict.
Great, good. That's the right answer. That's what we want to hear, that everyone is trying to work together to make this work, right? Casey, same apply to you in Omnicom?
It's all about collaboration for us. So definitely have our specialists, some of them are in the room, of out of home, and they have a very complementary skill set to our programmatic buyers. I think that we obviously have the activation and the data and like how we look at platforms on the programmatic side, and then I think a lot of what we need for planning has to do with the actual channel itself, and the metrics we care about are often kind of channel specific. Some of the reporting is a little bit more programmatic or kind of, I guess I should use data vaguely, but like very specific way of looking at data on the audience on the programmatic side. And so our main method is just get together and plan things cohesively across, regardless of whether or not it's traditional, digital, programmatic. Like that's the goal. This is a subset of inventory, that is part of the broader traditional plan.
And Stephanie, kind of both Matt and Casey have talked about data and data being the driving force behind the cohesion between kind of the programmatic trading team and the kind of traditional out-of-home team. Does the same apply within Dentsu?
It does. So the way we are structured is PosterScope being the out-of-home specialist and Amnet focusing more on the programmatic side. The relationship is great. We've learned how to come together and collaborate in terms of understanding. I mean, really, at the end of the day, I think we all understand that, I'm Martin Porter at PosterScope. He's going to be the specialist that understands out of home. He's going to be the one that's going to help bring me and my team to the forefront of what we're doing from an out of home perspective, whereas he knows to lean on me when he's thinking more about how do I want to take my strategy to the next level in terms of tying it together from an omni-channel perspective with that data layer. So yeah, to answer the relationship question, I think we're working together very well.
I guess I'm slightly surprised that it is all going so well, frankly. I'm a pessimist first and foremost. But I mean, it's interesting really because if you look at the channels that have come before out of home, that the similar kind of process that have tried, like connected TV, even kind of back in the day from mobile and even display, kind of IO versus programmatic, kind of there have been sort of land grabbing and fights going on there. Do you think that actually, having gone through this process so frequently now, that actually people are growing up and starting to understand that actually to drive things forward, we have to work together, it's the only option?
I don't think it means that we don't run into our own sets of challenges.
Yeah.
And it, honestly, from my perspective, it comes down to probably education level on both sides. It's not saying that one knows more than the other. It's just, it's new and it's different on both ends. And so I think that's maybe where you run into hiccups or not even hiccups, more just challenges.
Great. Fantastic. This is all nice and rosy. Tiffany and Jim, so from your perspective, who are you working with in the agencies, within the trading desks, within the kind of the agencies themselves? Are you working with PosterScope, for example? Are you working with Amnet? Kind of, where's the relationship there? And is it kind of is it challenging to try to kind of find the right people to speak to? Tiffany, let's start with you from the sort of trade desk, where you have very sort of predominantly strong agency relationships.
Yeah, it's great. I'm so glad the agencies are working really collaboratively together because coming from the supply side, what we're hearing is sometimes the publishers, you may be reaching out to a more traditional your traditional agency team versus working with us on the digital programmatic side. And so sometimes we're not speaking the same language, and that's always a little bit of a fun conversation from an education standpoint, trying to figure out what the standards you're referring to when you talk about screen size and formats. What does that actually mean? Does that correlate to all of the same items that we consider on the digital programmatic side? So it's been interesting trying to coordinate a lot of these conversations. From the Trade Desk perspective, we're very nascent in our exploration into the digital out-of-home space, just because I think there is so much to learn. Every publisher has a different view of what out-of-home represents. Every agency may also have a different view of what out-of-home item that they're trying to target, whether that's large screen billboards, airports, taxis, dentist office. So it's been an interesting overview to kind of navigate and to try to bring this new format into the digital programmatic space.
Interesting. And Jim?
Well, I won't mess up the happiness factor either.
No, go on, do. I want some,
I think you were trying to get us to mess up the
controversial.
happiness
I am, absolutely.
But look, I look at it, I liken it to TV. You talked about that earlier. And the reason I say that, I think TV and out-of-home are two areas where there was very specific buying entities in the agency, but also in the brands. The out-of-home budget sometimes sits different than the TV budget, than it sits in the website and the email and so forth. So how do I see working with agencies and I'd say brands and that triangulation? It is complex. And I'm not trying to use a safe word there and be Switzerland, as much as I actually feel for the agencies, because they're not trying to bring together in the digital space the subject matter expertise that you mentioned around the different channels. And there is a significant need for out-of-home as an entity in the way it is. There's a significant need for more and more of that to move to digital. There's opportunities to do it. So it's really, how do we work with the different subject matter expert channels, which sometimes have different buying centers in the brand. So that triangulation, if you will, brand, agency, and at least from an activation platform that we represent together, well, not together, I guess we're competitors, but
in
represent
the stage,
it's how do we triangulate that, because you have different buying centers in the brand, different buying centers and expertise to activate across different channels. So it is very challenging. I'll give one example. In the UK, with one of our partners up here, we worked with a client to drive a campaign around branding plus driving people into, we'll call it the store for now, and that was on a mobile and out of home. And there is mobile expertise for the mobile inventory, and there's out-of-home expertise on that. So we're trying to cross-channel plan it based on the data that we talked about earlier, but then how do you activate that? So it is that triangulation, the nuance of the specific teams, but enough horizontality that can do it.
And that leads very well into, I guess, from the agency perspective, understanding what your frustrations are when it comes to dealing. I mean, Jim gave a great example of kind of the omnichannel side of things there, where we are more and more kind of trying to feed in mobile and sort of proximity marketing into out-of-home and programmatic out-of-home. The different companies you're dealing with out there, there's a lot of new entrants coming in, as well as the more traditional out-of-home companies you're working with. What are your frustrations when it comes to kind of working with them and dealing with them? Casey, let's kick off with you.
Somebody's got to break the positivity, right?
I'm just trying to bring everyone down. It's just, I'm trying to bring everyone down, my British pessimism.
I mean, it's really tough when we have kind of two different sales arms from from a lot of our partners. Some of them even, some of them kind of going directly to our programmatic buyers, and on the worst days, it feels like exploiting the fact that they don't know the broader out-of-home plan, just in kind of like with short-sighted views of getting like a quick like 20K test campaign. Meanwhile, there's a much bigger out-of-home plan going on, some of which might even include programmatically activated inventory. We do everything we can to get the teams to kind of work together and be very aware. But inevitably, there's going to be certain meetings that just happen. You go out with a partner for lunch or something, and you come back, and the last thing we want is ad duplication and ads placed where they shouldn't be, just because a programmatic buyer bought something like that. So luckily, it doesn't happen often, but that effort is very clear on the sell side, and I guess it's somewhat frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Matt, do you see similar challenges?
Yeah, I think the industry at this point, given, and I keep going back to other traditional channels, but given where we were with television and premium video, I think the industry as a whole has rallied around that we need to show our clients that paid media, regardless of channel, works and drives their business forward, regardless of whatever that KPI is. So I think, yes, every company reports to their board of directors. If they're privately owned, they report to investors. So they have to deliver on those business needs. But at the end of the day, I think we've realized you could have that, but then also be able to drive value for our clients. And that means selling in different ways, leveraging data in different ways. And it's not an either or conversation. I mean, I think the whole world of it's not all going programmatic or audience driven. There's a role for contextual and there's a role for audience within a plan. The day that context doesn't matter and contextual, culturally relevant KPIs, that's the day that advertising dies. So I don't think it's an either or a frustration conversation. I think it's looking at the greater good and trying to show to our clients that context and audience drives their business forward.
And you raised an excellent point there, and what I was going to come on to next was the fact that, we have to remember that where the money comes from. The money comes from the advertisers, and the advertisers and their understanding of out-of-home and how they're buying out-of-home at the moment. And then this word programmatic, which has already been highlighted this morning, the fact that advertisers hear the word programmatic, they just think of transparency issues, lack of trust, lack of truth, not understanding what's going on, trying to make them transact out-of-home programmatically might kind of bring the fear of God into them in some ways. How are we trying to, is there education required? How do we get them on board? How do we get them to understand the benefits of actually trying to trade out-of-home programmatically as it pertains to kind of omni-channel, and how will it make their lives easier, or how will it make planning and buying media for them and for you all as well as their agencies, make it easier? Stephanie, what's your perspective?
I know, maybe we should just drop the term programmatic.
There will, hopefully in a few years, the word programmatic will just not exist. Don't terrify people with the word.
Only to your point, right. I think it can be a scary word, and really all we're trying to say is that we want to bring out of home, and really every channel, into the next evolution of the audience layer, making it less about the screen, more about who you're trying to target, less about the channel. I think probably a frustration might just be the human tendency to avoid change. And that's really what we're all trying to say we want to do, is to push the needle there and get to that next point.
Yeah, which Rashad said earlier, kind of everyone hates change. You can say you embrace it, but actually deep down you want things to remain the same. Jim, from your perspective, kind of what do you think, how do you think that we can get clients, advertisers on board with understanding the benefits of programmatic? Like, will programmatic help draw out increased out-of-home budgets? And how can the people in this room kind of help embrace that?
Well, if I listened to Rashad earlier today, we all need to get up at 4:30 in the morning and start learning every day.
I will not be doing that, but good luck to you.
But I believe that he does. So a couple things. Programmatic, Nick said it well this morning. He talked about sometimes is a bad word, and I do love the let's lose the term programmatic. Not our companies, but let's lose the term programmatic. But in all seriousness, it is an education around digital as much as anything else, and using software to drive digital. So everybody in the room today that is either an aggregator of inventory, that has the inventory, that's moving it over to digital, how do we transact on that more efficiently in a trustworthy way that, quite frankly, all boats rise? There may be times, give you an example of this, there's some perception that programmatic may drive costs up. And there's an interesting discussion that we had with an agency and a brand a couple weeks ago of a large tech company that, their senior leader that reported to the CMO said, look, I will spend more money on CPMs. Use an example. I will spend more money on out-of-home, as an example, as long as I can trust that on the other side of that is something's coming back. So it's not just about cost containment and fear. So part of the how do we get brands over the kind of the bridge, so to speak, is us together as an ecosystem of publishers and inventory, leveraging and being good stewards of the brand's dollars and helping them understand how to cross that bridge in a way that's saying we're using technology to make that digital transformation happen faster. And then lastly, I think one of the things that is we can continue, Nick talked about, not about transparency and trust, but truth. And if you put those 3 T's on a triangle, I think that's up to us to do. I think it's up to our companies that, if a dollar goes into one of our pieces of software, where does every part of that dollar go? Everywhere. And I think building on more and more of that kind of disclosure is another word I'll throw in there, I think gets people across that a little bit better.
And this applies to programmatic in general, not obviously just to out-of-home media. So as you're working on this more broadly and trying to bring transparency to the marketplace, to the entire ecosystem, out-of-home will be able to benefit from that, right? Yeah, and Tiffany, kind of from your perspective, as you're working with agencies, how are you helping agencies be able to educate their clients, and how are you working with them to try and make them understand kind of how they can transact as much media as possible kind of from an omnichannel perspective through the Trade Desk platform?
I don't know if I don't think if, let me put it this way. I think we're all responsible for this. I feel like the agencies have already begun that conversation. And I actually wanted to just touch a quick point on what Jim had said, which is it's interesting where out-of-home stands to date, whether it's for CTV or traditional home buy or traditional buying methodologies or selling methodologies, where I've been in, I'm sure we've all been in the space for over a decade, and so just watching someone like a New York Times or BBC, who historically said we're not ever going to trust programmatic, there's stigmas across it, now really dedicate to that. So yes, I think programmatic is going away, and I think agencies have responded to that a lot of on the digital front. It is more of the traditional conversations that we're having, whether that is for CTV, for out of home. How do we start consolidating this? Because the end state isn't that it should be programmatic versus non-programmatic, brand versus performance. We're really looking at audience. How do we find that right audience layer, find the right user, serve them the right item, make sure the brands and the campaigns run actively, make sure the publishers are happy with their user base and their end product, and how do we really facilitate a lot of those conversations?
And Casey, you mentioned ad duplication earlier. Oh, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I got to say something about that one. I think we, you guys know what I'm talking about. I think we do a disservice to the notion of intelligent media buying or just like data-driven media buying by kind of putting it in a box that already has a bunch of stigma, already has a bunch of issues. Programmatic buying, like if you were to ask any media buyer, do they want to buy smarter, or do they want to buy in a way that theoretically or hopefully is true to the channel but just gives them more real-time means by which they can optimize? Do they want like a wide access to inventory that they can activate, like, you know, maybe not tomorrow on every channel, but within a couple of days? Do you want consolidated reporting? Do you want to like look across channels? Like every single one of those questions, the answer is yes. The minute then you say, do you want to do programmatic media buying, you start to get 50-50 and stuff. And so I literally in this discussion, I was thinking back on a podcast I listened to where the host asked, like, is there a place for programmatic buying when it's not audience-based? And I was taken aback because this is like my background. Like, of course, there's programmatic buying. Programmatic buying helps you buy contextually. It helps you buy based on ad placement on a page. It helps you buy geographically. It's all over the place. And I think if we got past that question without saying that there's a whole lot more to it than just audiences, because that is a pretty significant leap we're taking as an industry, I think we'd continue to do a disservice. So had to take that break for that one. You also had a question.
No, I completely agree with you. So actually, what we're trying to tell advertisers here is that we aren't trying to convince you to use programmatic just for audience targeting. There are more benefits beyond audience.
The value of programmatic is that once we have fantastic data on the reporting side, then we can actually action on it and optimize a plan. That's it.
Yeah.
And like I think that some of the challenges right now in out of home specifically is there's a serious aversion to now mind you, Geopath doing great work. I'm a huge fan of the work that Place Exchange and Vistar are doing right now to try to like help us cut horizontally or look horizontally across inventory. But going back to the two different sales channels, kind of like the programmatic offering for a lot of our partners is very different from the direct offering, and it makes it very hard to have a punchy, concise value prop that we can go to market with. Our clients would answer yes to all of those questions as well. Do they want to optimize more quickly? Do they want wide access to inventory? But if we can't say that in out-of-home universally, that's not the message yet. But it is in every other channel, and it's, I hate to say it in front of the room, but like, it's undeniably where it's going to go. So we need to be able to do that. Did that answer your question, or did I go off?
Matt, you want to say something?
No, I mean, I think it's less about, we all focus, I absolutely agree with all those points. Programmatic is really about portfolio management. As I see it in doing, our clients entrust us with their media investments, which is a lot of money. And if I can make that portfolio work harder, whether it's on an audience KPI or a business KPI, I'm going to do that. And I think it's about moving away from audience is the first step, but it's really about just proving the outcomes. And I know I'm repeating myself, but that's really what it's about. And it doesn't have to be a lower funnel action every time. It really doesn't. But again, as we get to those outcome-based buying quicker, I think that will serve publishers, it'll serve clients, it'll serve agencies and the whole ecosystem.
And I want to talk, we talked about money earlier and if there's money being left on the table from kind of existing national advertisers that are currently investing in out-of-home, if there's opportunity, great opportunity for more budget from them for programmatic that they can kind of tie back to other channels. What about new money? Does programmatic actually can it bring new money to the out-of-home ecosystem? And, you know, sort of Nick Bryan was talking earlier about the disruptors, the D2Cs. They are big, they're trying to disintermediate and run everything themselves. They are performance-based. Out-of-home traditionally has not really been a performance-based channel. It's been about visibility, it's been about awareness. Is programmatic able to actually help these kinds of brands actually run performance-based out-of-home advertising? Jim, what's your perspective on that from MediaMath?
So I think the answer is yes. And first of all, the audience in the room, it should be yes. Especially the yield comment for those that are focusing on margin of it. You know, advertising budgets continue to go as long as the macroeconomic, you know, things are going well in different, you know, certainly tier 1 countries around the world. So I think advertising in general continues to go up. If there's a microeconomic issue, then that might, you know, that aside for a second, the assumption that that's not there today, there is. And if I think about it, you know, it's there is a place for a static out-of-home asset and inventory. But the ability to then target quickly and to be able to, when a brand wants to get their message to a certain place, it's not just based on the audience buying, as these guys have said, but it's also, there is a need for that. There is value to that. So I think there is more money to be made at a, you know, I think the CPM discussion was really interesting that Nick put up. So I think depending how you look at more money, I look at it as, is there more value exchange between you all and a brand leveraging all of us up here that are very aligned on trying to do this the best with the brand and be a steward of brand's dollars? I think the answer is yes. I think it should be more valuable as long as we have the right data that supports the value we bring.
Yeah.
Go on, Casey.
All right. I mean, I think that D2C, like, that's the best model to look at, because what do they do really well? Sorry, I got to do the mic. What do they do really well? Which is they are continually optimizing the experience so that what they learn from their current, whether it's paid media or their website or whatever else, they optimize and they're smarter the more use there is. And so as we have better reporting, which is step number one, what we get out of the reporting should become immediately actionable. Even if there's a little bit of lag, totally fine. We should get better at making that lag less and less. And out of home, I think, has a place anywhere that I mean, really anything that's performance oriented just means that they're kind of budget conscious and they're trying to find efficiencies. It's just saying we get better at reducing that lag. I will say, though, performance is yet another nebulous word that we overuse in the industry. And I think that like this doesn't necessarily mean low funnel metrics. This also means I want to make sure I find the best incremental reach that I can, and I have multiple exposure channels, and maybe TV becomes inefficient. I also think that this entire room feels, and probably is accurate in, that out-of-home is probably under-attributed and undervalued. And so if you make that link quicker in re-optimizing from other channels or re-optimizing within the channel, I think you'll see an influx of dollars, performance advertiser or otherwise. You know?
Yeah, so it doesn't mean tying out-of-home back to a CPA, because that arguably could be dangerous. And so performance actually should be kind of outcomes rather than we're trying to achieve an outcome. What is our outcome and what role does out-of-home play in the outcome?
I think a CPA is your total media spend, or total media spend divided by actions. It's not one line item or one channel. So I think we do I think it's great, and like I mentioned a couple of incremental steps forward towards like omni-channel planning and whatnot, or omni-channel activations. But I think that there's a lot of value in thinking about on-target delivery within some reasonable like kind of notion of saturation and frequency management and things like that. And like some of it, look, it's a one-to-many channel. It's going to be a little bit different and difficult to do that. But our goal should be reaching the right audience 9 times of the time. I think there are a couple of vendors that sell, or rather supply partners, that have stuff that causes immediate action, but a lot of out-of-home isn't. And I think that we should be looking more at on-target delivery than we probably do as an industry for changing into programmatic. Programmatic also doesn't mean CPA goals.
Yeah.
Can I just add
Tiffany.
in a word? So I totally agree. I think one caveat that I'd love to just bring up, and not that we don't love already working with great top tier agencies like yourself. But I think, especially because we are global, we're starting to see a lot of smaller agencies or smaller local buyers, brands who may not have had that exposure to buy a giant billboard or have those dollars now programmatically have access to something that they never did before. So if you're asking about incremental dollars, that's something that's very exciting for them. And then, I mean, it's the same conversation I have for CTV and audio. It's how do you extend beyond the typical substance that you typically see. So I just wanted to add that in.
And I want to, I mean, so Casey talked about ad duplication earlier, and kind of when you're having conversations with a trading team and a kind of out-of-home team, how do you, Stephanie, how do you manage internally kind of the direct conversations that are being had with out-of-home media owners and the conversations that are then being had with the technology layer, and ensuring that you're able to get the brands and yourselves to understand how you can make programmatic work from an analog perspective and from a programmatic perspective?
Sure. I think that can be, I think we've talked a bit about how that can be where the disconnect comes into play.
Yeah. Is there a brand safety challenge at play here, that conversation that has to be had?
Right. And just general education and understanding. The same presentation may go out to two different teams, and the understanding level of it may be different. So what we've done on our side is come together with the teams at PosterScope and Amnet. So to make sure that we're all understanding things in the same way, we have those constant conversations. So I would think just in general, it's the internal communication layer, making sure you have identified who those stakeholders are, and you're making sure you are coming together and controlling the conversation.
And who is responsible for this? Who is responsible for making programmatic out of home the big thing for 2019? Anyone? Everyone?
I think it is everyone, yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
You're both so polite.
The audience out here as well, so it's not just up here, right? So I just want to make sure
everybody
you're
in this room.
Everyone. And 3 conversations yesterday was very similar, and I love the way you talked about TV and audio. It's a similar discussion, and I liked how we were talking about it's not just about it's audience planning, but not just that. It's based on data. I mean, we've been in the out-of-home business for 3 years. We were early in. It's never where we want it to be. It's growing. We always want it to be more. And it's not just about the revenue for us. It should be more. And the complexities we're trying to simplify. I know our 2 companies are working really hard to do that. Competitors are not competitors. How do we do it? And we have great partnerships and these agency partners to do that. But it's all of our job to do it, and both be good stewards of the money, as I said earlier, but it is absolutely the ability for us to go drive much better engagement for our brands this way.
And I'll just add in, you had mentioned Vistar and Place Exchange. They're doing some great movement to kind of move more into the digital programmatic space. Rubicon is also involved in there as well. But I think it is absolutely all of our responsibilities, everybody here at this conference, to help push this, because the divide, I think, the education piece is a big divide. We're not using the same terms. I've mentioned this multiple times today on the panel, but the fact that we don't have standards, the fact that we have to build custom spec to every publisher, to every screen type, is going to take a toll. It will make it a lot harder, I think, for brands and agencies to optimize if there is no standard ability for you to reference everything. And then from a tech layer, that makes it a lot difficult for us to try to provide a more standardized platform for that to be conducted. So at the end of the day, I think that does go back to your statement of how are we leaving money on the table? That's how we're leaving money on the table, because we're wasting so much time. We're not being efficient. We could make this a much better place. And then I just want to throw out to the audience members of the room that we mentioned that there's a lot of dollars to be found, but if we did have that exposure and showed the omni-channel experience, maybe you guys could start stealing, because the performance is better, the data is there. You could start taking it away from CTV dollars or from digital because your performance is better. But we just don't have that ability to showcase that yet. And so until we can bridge that divide, it's very hard for us to really, I think, be as aggressive to making 2019 the year of digital out of home.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And we're running out of time, but I just want to end on, I want each of you to give me your brief thought on why, for everyone in the room, why programmatic for out-of-home media is achievable and should be embraced and not feared. Casey, let's start with you.
Start with me. Okay. I think it's just a new way to sell the inventory that you have in the way that our advertisers and we ourselves are asking to buy. And I think that there's probably an undervaluing of it, so it should be attractive to everybody in the room.
Jim?
We're getting rid of programmatic here today, so you've heard that first. It's about driving quicker to the eyeball and driving up value and revenue associated with it.
Yeah, great. Tiffany?
Ditto. No, I think, I don't have much to add from either one of them.
Well, that's nice. Everyone's agreed.
Because it's evolution, it's change. I mean, don't you want to be on the forefront of the next thing? That would be what I would think.
Yeah.
I would say change is hard. Gradual change is easier, but focus on coming on the wave of personalization and outcome-based buying.
Brilliant, great, thank you everyone. It's a big topic, there's a lot to kind of cover, and we've run out of time, which is a shame. It's something I could talk about for hours, certainly, but kind of we'll all be around if you want to kind of delve into it in more detail, and a lot of the tracks this afternoon will go into kind of the deep dive of programmatic out of home as well. So on that note, I want to say thank you very much to my panelists, to Casey, Jim, Tiffany, Stephanie, and Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you.